Okay, thank you, Professor Robert Schindler, for coming to us and helping us understand a little bit more about the challenges of pricing. Uh, so, Professor Schindler, can you tell us a little bit more about your book, Pricing Strategies, Harvesting Product Value?
Well, I think you captured it. I think pretty well as we were talking that it's based on some time well-worn principles that have been around for decades and have been integrated actually fairly well by Tom Nagel in his book. But his book it tends to be very managerial in focus, and he looks at big pictures a lot. And what a lot of times he doesn't do is look at the nuts and bolts, the actual strategies, the actual procedures, pricing procedures that are actually being used or should be used or could be used in pricing tactics, in pricing procedures. So that in my book, I try to capture both. I try to have the overall organization about the big picture, but I also then sort of focus it down in an organized way to give specific instructions and specific guidance for each kind of pricing situation. But
Yes.
hopefully, when you look at the whole of it, it sort of covers the whole span of things that you'd actually have to think about in pricing.
Totally. Before we get into the nuts and bolts, Professor, can you tell us about your academic and professional interest in pricing? And I'm asking because I look at your background, and your background is in biochemistry and psychology. So what motivated you to research and publish around pricing?
Well, my degree is actually in psychology, and I've been very interested in terms of my research over the years in the psychology of pricing. But I guess what you're asking is how I got interested in pricing from psychology, and that's because after I got my degree, I worked for a while at AT&T. Long at the time, it was in the process of becoming an independent company. It was from a regulated utility to an independent company. But one of the things that they asked me to do as a task, I was in the market research department. They asked me to sort of, they were talking about a price promotion that they were thinking of doing, and they said they wanted me to estimate the demand effect for the price promotion. And I was on a team of people to do that, and the other people were sort of economists, and they sort of took a look at the their data on the price elasticity of long distance calling, which is pretty low, right? Sort of a utility. It's something you do because you need to do it, and you're not that price sensitive to it. So he said, well, we shouldn't, here's a price promotion for long distance calling. It was a package plan of sorts. So you shouldn't expect a really a large increase in sales from it, because we know that the price elasticity is very low. It's 0.5, 0.6, that kind of thing. And I said, well, wait a minute. This is not a routine price fluctuation. Those numbers that you got are from routine price fluctuations. This is a price promotion. That's an entirely different animal. And there's no way you can generalize from price elasticities judged from routine price fluctuations to a price promotion. And that's a whole nother thing. And that got me into, it made me realize that a lot of people who have done work on pricing haven't really looked at the psychology of it. And so that's what I've been doing in my research over the years, and in the process, teaching it and seeing what needed to be taught, both the overall economic structure of it and the details, some of which are very human behavior related.
Yeah, I can't agree more with you, because I'm also interested in the study of price perception from the psychological perspective, of course. But in your opinion, where are the differences in the study of pricing from that psychological perspective versus the economic or even the financial perspective that oftentimes we find in companies?
Well, to get an idea of the psychological perspective, you really need to talk to the customer and not just look at the numbers. You got to do some hands-on research and to see how they think about it, right? And you know what, like for a price promotion, I mean, the amazing thing is that a lot of people think that it's sort of they look at it as sort of a game that they can win. They say, oh, well, I make that much calls. I'll buy that package plan because I know that I'll beat that. I'm going to beat it. but they don't beat it, right? That's why it's such a profitable thing to have that kind of package, that package deal, right? But people sort of get into the game of it, and a lot of times they get a lot of times illusory idea that they're gonna win that game, and that sort of motivates them to buy a lot. So
Yeah,
that's the kind of
very
thing you see when
interesting.
you start to look at the psychological aspect of it.
Totally. But now, Professor, in your opinion, what are the biggest challenges that companies are facing nowadays when they're developing their pricing strategy?
Well, of course, it's the big change in the last decade or two has been towards the tech aspect and dynamic pricing. And that's obviously the biggest challenge. How to navigate the change from traditional pricing to dynamic pricing, the things
Correct,
in
correct,
that direction.
correct. And another thing that I've been witnessing over the years is the role of the price practitioner in the companies. So, how do you regard today the role of the price practitioner in the modern company that is?
What should the role be?
Yeah, the role of the price practitioner in the modern company.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for one thing, you should probably have more of a tech background than in the past.
Mhm.
And you know, I would say it depends on the industry. If it's a service industry, then there's probably going to be quite a bit of people who are involved in the pricing technology. While if we're talking about goods or especially packaged goods or things like that, then there would not be uh, probably a vast number of people who are involved in the pricing aspect, and it may not be, dramatically different than it had been in the past.
Yeah, exactly. But one thing I've been noticing, Professor, in this common role of pricing is that difficulty of balancing long-term, revenue goals with long-term profitability and high customer experience. So how do you think that price practitioners can balance these requirements?
Of long-term profitability. Um,
And yeah, and versus revenue maximization and maximizing the customer experience.
yeah. Well, certainly the customer experience comes first. And that's the theme of the book, theme of my book, harvesting product value, that by far most of the efforts of the organization should be on the customer experience, creating and maintaining the value to the customer. Pricing is harvesting that value that you've created. You don't create value by pricing. You bring it in. It's the achievement that you harvest from all of the other work that you've put in. So
Yes,
yeah, so in that sense, I think that the focus should be on the growing, and you know if you do a good job in creating the positive customer experience, the revenue generation will follow.
correct, correct, correct. But
And
now,
the trick in pricing is to make sure you capture that revenue,
exactly right.
that value that you've created. But basically, by far, the most important thing is to work on the customer experience, managing that value.
Correct, correct. Professor, when I was reading your book, I noticed the emphasis on setting of prices. In particular, you have different chapters, one for the setting of initial prices and a different one for the modification, sorry, for the setting of initial prices and for the modification on existing prices. Why do you think it's important to understand such a difference?
Good question, because the modification, most of the pricing tasks involve products that already have a price, and then
Mhm.
or you want to modify it to see if you can harvest more of the value that you've created from that product, right? And that's most of the pricing tasks, and there's a technology for that. That's actually been increasingly automated and could be more so. So it's uh it is, a thing in itself, to be able to tweak that price to get the maximum amount of harvest the maximum amount of value
Of value.
created. But when you're pricing something that's never been had a price before, it's a really different kind of task. It's not something that's going to lend itself to automation. It's not going to lend itself. There's not a lot of tech changes there.
Correct.
In that area. It involves market, a lot of times traditional market research, looking at the customer, talking to the customer, interacting with the customer, and understanding how the customer uses the product and when the customer uses the product and what the customer would use if he didn't use your product and how would he use it? How much of it would he use? That's not a tech solution. That's a,
yeah. In particular, when you are pricing a radical innovation,
yeah,
that nobody has seen before. Yeah, it's a very interesting challenge. So I also noticed that the chapter on empirically measuring the price change response, which I found very interesting to have that as a separate chapter. But my question to you is that, do you think that there are other methodologies for measuring that price change response that you would probably wanted to include in your chapter?
Automated price measurement. Yes, I talk about that somewhat in chapter 17. That it, that lends itself to, price estimation and price response estimation lends itself to automation and lends itself to AI. And so I would expect that what advances pricing will have from AI will be on the measurement of price sensitivity. And so certainly, as you've seen from the book, that the decision about whether to raise or lower an existing price, it depends crucially on the market's response to that price change. In other words, the price sensitivity for that product in that region of the price. And you can look at past data from that, and I do talk about the traditional ways to do that, but technology has made big changes in that, and that can be done on a running basis now. And there could be systems now that are always putting out estimates of price sensitivity, dashboards even for the managers about how what's our best estimate of the likely price response for a change in this product or that change or that product of this magnitude or that magnitude. And that AI, I would think, has real potential there.
Correct. But now following that, one criticism I have with some pricing books is that they separate the use of artificial intelligence like if we're talking about something else, something different. Whereas I believe that artificial intelligence is used to leverage what we're doing. So what are your thoughts? Like, for example, you don't have a chapter on artificial intelligence in your book. So because I believe it's implied in
chapter 17,
everything that you've been covering. So what are your thoughts? Will you prefer to add like as a chapter on artificial intelligence in another edition, or what are your thoughts?
For sure it would be a priority for the third edition. And in chapter 17, which is new in the second edition, I sort of spell out an algorithm for modifying prices, which sort of sets up the situation and then says, okay, now let's look at our estimate of how the market's going to respond to this possible price change. And see if it suggests we should do it or not. And if not, let's consider a smaller one, or let's consider a price, a price increase rather than a price decrease. And you go through an iterative process like that. But that kind of estimate about what the market's going to do for this price change, that's where the AI is going to come in. So it's not just looking at simply routine price changes over time like they did at AT&T. They looked at the rate changes, the rates in different states and the rates in different time periods, and they looked at demand. It's going to be much more sophisticated than that. And that's where the AI is coming in.
Yeah,
so
now
in a lot of things into account to estimate price sensitivity.
Yes, in a related topic, algorithmic pricing or dynamic pricing relies a lot on AI, but now we can see newer implementations of dynamic pricing in areas such as restaurants, theme parks, and movie theaters. So what are your thoughts about extending the use of dynamic pricing in what I will call non-traditional industries?
Yeah, be careful. Be careful for sure, because there's potential for greater profitability from it, but you have to take into account that you could easily offend customers by it. And so I would go really, in traditional industries where there isn't much price change, where there isn't a lot of dynamic pricing, I would go really, really slow for adding that, because you want to avoid the Coke machine example, right? Are you familiar with that? Right, where when they first came out with the technology to change the price of the Coke based on of a Coke machine based on the temperature of the air around the machine. Like, so it's a really hot day, they raised the price of the Coke, and it was a really cold day, they lowered the price. People hated that. That got such terrible publicity that they withdrew it, and it, like, almost denied that they ever even thought of it. It was a tremendous embarrassment. So you don't want to do something like that. You don't want to think that you don't want to put yourself in the position of a seller who's set up to take advantage of any vulnerability in the consumer's standpoint. So that you have to work hard to avoid any of that any impression like that.
Totally. But now following up on that, on ethical pricing, I noticed your chapter some price fences. So actually, I appreciate the level of detail of covering price fences in the book. But now, how can price practitioners prevent to incur in price discrimination, for example, now that we're talking about ethical pricing, when implementing these price fences that you were covering?
Well, the price fences are what they are because they're pretty acceptable, like volume discounts, like time of day discounts, like place of purchase discounts, like special feature, discounts or premiums for choice of features. Those are tried and true phenomena. And what I've done in the book, I've pulled them together and I talk about them in a unified framework. But they've been around for forever in pricing.
Yes, yes,
Now,
exactly right.
when you get to the other things, you get to the things like the ride hailing services, that when demand starts to increase, then the prices go way up. Now you're skirting dangerous territory now, and it'll have to be seen how people react. It's a mixed bag. On one hand, when the demand goes way up, then price goes way up, but then you can at least get a cab. You can get a ride. While before the price wouldn't go up, but you didn't get a ride. So how are people going to respond to that? My hunch is that for something like ride-hailing services, I think it's going to become acceptable
Yeah.
because people do appreciate that, in those high demand situations, they are going to get a ride, even though they're going to pay through the nose for it. So I think it's going to be acceptable, but in other situations, it might not be. And
It may be more difficult, yes, to accept.
yeah, you have to be very careful to very, very careful if you're using information that's specific to the customer. So if he thinks that you're looking at his past browsing history to judge the price he's going to charge, dangerous. I would probably stay away from that in most situations.
Yes. Well, the last chapter in your book was about the societal implication of pricing. So is there anything else that you think that we should be aware of when it comes to, I call it ethical pricing, when it comes to ethical pricing, that would you like to recommend to new price practitioners?
Well, it's simply be sensitive to people's feelings, and that's really important. A lot of times going by the law, I say, well, this is completely legal, but if people are offended by it, if they consider it unethical, it's going to hurt your reputation, and it's going to eventually lead to new laws, new regulations, which you're probably not going to like. So, like volume discounts or volume surcharges, for example, is an example of that, where sometimes price per ounce is going to be higher for the larger package size than for the lower package size. And that happened because there's more competition for the lower package size, and that drove the price down. But then people look at that and they say, well, it's a higher per ounce price for the higher package size. They don't like that. Well, you probably shouldn't do it. If you're going to lower the price per ounce for the smaller size, you better do it for the larger size too, because you just don't want to create that ill will. It's not worth it.
Yeah, but we also have now different courts of law, like for example, the court of public opinion, social media, for example, that is keeping everybody on check.
It exaggerates public opinion. Yeah, so that makes it even more important that you pay attention to how the customer feels about the price.
Yes. Now, Professor, now talking as an educator, as a marketing educator, one of the things that I've been puzzled is by the lack of coverage of pricing in graduate programs, in masters, in marketing, MBAs around the nation. There are actually very few universities that teach pricing at the undergrad or at the grad level. So what are your thoughts? Do you think that this is an oversight? Do you think that is that's the way it is? What are your opinions regarding that?
I think it's a historical accident that when business schools were developed, they taught the obviously business functions, like advertising and personnel management and supply chain operations and stuff like that. And they left things like pricing to the economics department. So the way the university was organized, the economists said, well, that's what we do. We do, demand and price and demand curves. And so a lot of times economics departments would teach a pricing course, and so the business school didn't have to do that. Now, the economics course that's taught, a pricing course that is taught in an economics department will be pretty inadequate for a manager. And so that realization has been coming and has led to books like mine to allow for more and more pricing taught in business schools. But it's a historical accident, I think.
Correct. The same like realizing that the students typically don't get enough education around revenue generation, despite that they are in a course of business, but more of revenue management or revenue control, but not revenue generation or not revenue maximization.
Something on revenue generation, on pricing should be required for sure.
It's, indeed. So yes, I'm glad to hear that actually. Professor, I don't have more questions. I really appreciate. I'm very excited that you took time from your busy agenda to share your thoughts with us. Are there any final thoughts that you want to share with future price practitioners?
Well, the only general point that I would like to make is that, and I think it's very clear from my book, but nevertheless, it's a lesson that needs to be said again and again, and that is beware of cost-based pricing. It's sometimes been called one of the 5 sins of business. Cost-based pricing. There's a seductiveness to that, especially people who, when they're first starting out, is to sort of look at their costs and then set the price. And I think I argue in many places in the book that you're almost certain to be not adequately fully harvesting the value you're creating if you're doing that. Your price will either be too low or too high. And that's so whatever you do, do your best to stay away from that thing that's seductive that too many pricing people do, and that is base their pricing solely on costs.
Yeah. But I will probably add that to be aware of relying too much on competitive pricing too.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
So,
ultimately, the price, the most important and the initial and the most important factor in pricing should be the customer and the customer's value and the customer's demand. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Professor, and thank you for helping us with your thoughts. And I can wait having my students reading your book.
Good. Well, thank you. It's my pleasure to talk with you, and thank you again for adopting the book. And I hope the course goes well.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay.